Hello, Facebook family. Hello, IntellectualRadio.com family. This is Humanity in the Headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan, and I'm solo today for the first time. I swear I'm like a bear without his fur. But we're going to make it through today. David Seaton, my co-host, is not available today, unfortunately. But he actually will be joining us in a little bit via the phone. He and I are going to chop it up about Bill O'Reilly's ousting at Fox and basically asking what in the world took so long. So we got a lot to talk about today. It's been a crazy week without even getting into the Trump administration and all the things that are going on out of the White House. We had an unfortunate situation about almost a week ago. I think it was last Sunday. A gentleman went on Facebook Live, Mr. Steve Stevens, and shot a victim he didn't even know out of the blue because he was upset over a breakup with his girlfriend, probably had some type of mental break. And we're going to have Dr. Tiffany Sanders on today. A lot of you may know her. She is a friend of the show. She's a Chicago girl, esteemed psychologist, and she is amazing. You've seen her on CNN, WGN, HLN, all those things. They get advice from her. So she is, and she's a practicing psychologist as well. So she actually has a practice. So we bring the best of the best on for Humanity in the Headlines for you today. And I can't wait to get into this conversation. So we're going to take a brief break. And when we come back, we're going to be on the line with David Seaton, and we're going to talk about the firing of Bill O'Reilly. And we ask again, what took so long? Wait till you hear some of this information we've got for you guys. You're listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be right back. We are back. This is Humanity in the Headlines. And again, I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. On the line with me is my good friend and my co-host, Mr. David Seaton. David, how are you, sir?
What's going on, Mr. Buchanan? What's going on to Humanity in the Headlines and everybody listening today?
Absolutely, man. I'm glad you're here because it gives me some sense of normalcy now. It's like Linus with his blanket. I was just feeling completely naked a few minutes ago, but having you on the phone is great. So, man, we got to chop it up though. I know that you're pressed for time, so we're gonna go ahead and just get right into it. It's funny because when I heard the news about Bill O'Reilly being fired, and we all kind of knew that was going to happen, right? Once they said he was going on vacation, we all knew that was code word for he's done. So it wasn't.
They even tried to spin that originally because they were saying his vacation was planned a year ago.
Right. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a spin factor. That's what they got to do. But the no spin zone, right? So that's what that's what they have to do. But we all knew what time it was. And again, my larger point is when I heard the news, you were the first person I thought of. If people don't know, back in the day, you were trying to get me turned on to Fox News many years ago, and you would call me frustrated at the dog whistle politics and racism, at the hypocrisy of it all. And I was, at the time, I just wasn't really into it yet. And I remember when I finally did break down and kind of catch Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and Combs, it was back then, I was like, oh my God, how does he watch this every day?
Exactly.
I'd been watching it for 20 minutes, and I think that's part of how my blood pressure got bad. So, but you were the first person I thought of, and you and I have not had this discussion, so it's going to be fresh for our listeners. So I'd like to ask you right off the bat, what were your initial thoughts when you heard that he was being let go?
I got to be honest with you. The first thing that I thought of when I heard about Bill O'Reilly being let go, I thought about all of the episodes that I've watched of the O'Reilly Factor over the years, where he talked about Ludacris comes to mind specifically. I remember he had this huge campaign trying to get Ludacris dropped as an ad. He was doing an ad for Pepsi at the time.
Yes.
And Bill O'Reilly was basically the whole premise for his argument was that Ludacris's persona as a rapper was incongruent or should not have been paired with Pepsi as a national brand being sold in the United States. He took offense to the fact that Pepsi would use Ludacris, someone who, in his opinion, and Bill O'Reilly's opinion, had this tarnished reputation from being a gangster rapper. So again, it's just sweet hypocrisy to hear in Bill O'Reilly's statement that he released, where he said basically he was being targeted because he was rich, and that it's unfortunate that he got ran off of his show based on innuendo.
Yeah, I think the exact phrase he used was unfounded claims.
Right. And if you notice, he's being very, very careful. Bill O'Reilly, through this entire ordeal, has never denied the claims. He just says they haven't been proven, or he's deflected by saying, of course he's a target because he's a rich man.
Exactly.
So, but again, he's been very careful not to flat out refute any of these charges because he knows that could be used against him in a court of law.
Well, here, let's talk about the real reason that he was fired, because he really wasn't fired, in my opinion, for any ethical reasons, for any reasons based in morality. He was fired because the show had began to lose advertisers, and these advertisers had taken a position. So let me just go through the list here of folks that left the O'Reilly Factor when this happened. And by the way, before we even get to that, just so in case our listeners don't know, all of this came about because of an article in the New York Times, and they were able to unfurl the fact that Bill O'Reilly had paid, or that Fox News and Bill O'Reilly combined had paid out $13 million in claims over the years to different women that had sued him over sexual harassment. So that's really what got the ball rolling in this. And then when that happened and it became, national news, then we had, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Lexus, Hyundai, and Mitsubishi. But the list goes on. Pharmaceutical makers, GlaxoSmithKline and Bayer, Sanofi Consumer Care, and insurers Allstate and Esurance. And that's the tip of the iceberg. Pacific Life, Jenny Craig, Advil. I'm not going to read them all, but H&R Block, Orkin, Constant Contact. You name it. He had such. I didn't know he had such a breadth of advertisers that were advertising on his show. Even the Society for Human Resource Management, TouchNote, TrueCar, Invisalign. I mean, the list just goes on and on. These are all people that have now abandoned his show, and I think the total number of advertisers that have left have been 60. So what do you make of the assessment of him being fired? Do you think it was actually something, again, based in morality or ethics, or was it simply a matter of numbers?
Well, it was definitely a fact of numbers. It's interesting that you bring up all of the American advertisers that Fox, that the O'Reilly Factor was using, but even more than that, Rupert Murdoch is in the middle of a merger in Europe for his other network that he owns over there called Sky. And Sky is the far larger jewel in his entire media conglomerate. And he didn't want the Bill O'Reilly, he didn't want to get that backsplash from the negative advertiser and the negative PR he was getting on the American side of the pond to adversely impact this merger he's trying to do in Europe right now. So certainly he's lost, the Bill O'Reilly Factor lost a lot of advertisers during its hour, but the far larger issue for him is this larger merger that he's trying to do in Europe. So at the end of the day, to answer your original question, this has nothing to do with ethics. It has nothing to do with them caring about Fox News as an organization, caring about how they treat women. This has to do with, at the end of the day, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars.
Exactly. So, what comes to mind is the many interviews that I've seen since that have talked about and confirmed the culture at Fox News,
Correct.
the culture of sexism, the culture of harassment, and the culture of racism, in particular to minorities and to women. And when I hear that, one of the victims recanted her story, not recanted, but retold her story on CNN, and what she said was uh, basically that no matter who she aired her grievances to, the general response was simply, "Hey, it's Bill. What are you going to do?
Exactly.
It's the biggest show here. He's a jerk. Everybody hates him, but what are you going to do?" And
Exactly.
could you speak to then the culture that I would imagine is still at Fox News? Because you have to include, like you mentioned, you have to include Roger Ailes in this conversation as well.
Oh, we have to include Roger Ailes. We have to include Donald Trump. I mean, this really is just a microcosm of one of the main topics that Bill O'Reilly discussed on his show with regularity, and that is the deconstruction of the white male power structure that is going on in the United States. And it's ironic that that was one of the topics that he went on at length about so often in his show, and that ultimately that it was that his maladroit behavior of harassing women was actually the thing that brought him down. It just boggles the mind that Bill O'Reilly, at the end of the day, thought that because he was a rich, powerful white man, that he was immune from any of the
Right.
repercussions of his poor behavior. But let's not feel too bad for Bill, because he is getting a payout since they are canceling his contract and they are releasing him. He is getting a payout of $25 million.
Right.
I feel bad for the guy.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I wouldn't feel bad for him in any circumstance whatsoever, but certainly with that type of payout, I think Bill is going to be just fine. So you brought up Donald Trump, and I'm glad you did, because here's the thing. When you have a culture like that, culture starts from the top. So
Right.
we had Roger Ailes, who was above Bill O'Reilly, and he has been ousted from Fox for sexual harassment. So there
Correct.
was there was a clear pattern of behavior that, again, that was endorsed by people at the top. What does it say about the United States of America that we've elected a president at the top who is lockstep with Bill O'Reilly? He even defended Bill O'Reilly, saying that he was a good man,
Exactly.
that he shouldn't have settled, without knowing any of the facts of what had happened. And this is the
Right.
man, again, that we can never ever forget is the pussy grabber in chief. So what does it
You
speak?
know,
What does it say about us as a country? That, again, starting at the top, that's our culture.
the other person that comes to mind when you ask that question, as you were posing that question, the other person that comes to mind is Bill Cosby. Because at some point in the beginning, when the stories were coming out about Bill Cosby, people were just kind of dismissing them, and they were using the same defense. Oh, these are just disgruntled women who are attacking a powerful man. But at some point, there were a number of women that there was some threshold that was crossed where everyone, including Bill O'Reilly, there was a certain, when it went past a certain number of women, he finally said, okay, there's got to be something there. Where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, they spent the entire campaign attacking Hillary Clinton based simply on the fact by saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. Hey, we've got all these incidences. But it's hilarious that Bill O'Reilly and Fox News had to pay out over $13 million in sexual harassment settlements, but the claims are unfounded, and there's nothing going on. That's why I really admire the women who actually came out that actually brought him down, because they weren't suing for money. All they wanted was an apology and an acknowledgement of what had occurred. But again, this does speak to a larger cultural deficit that we're experiencing, and it goes back to Bill O'Reilly's often repeated point that.
Dave, are you still there? All right, looks like we lost Mr. Seaton. We're going to try and get him back in a moment. Let me go ahead and just take a quick break, and we'll see if we can get him back to wrap up this conversation about Mr. Bill O'Reilly. Thank you for listening to and watching Humanity in the Headlines. doggone technical problems. We are back with Humanity and the Headlines with Mr. David Seaton. If you just tuned in, we are discussing the ouster of Bill O'Reilly from Fox News. So, Dave, let's do this. Let's kind of go through a timeline of information I have here as to how this all came about. And this is specific to the sexual harassment claims, because there's actually more to discuss. But in 2002, according to a current and former employee interviewed by the Times, O'Reilly stormed into a Fox News room and screamed at a young producer. Not long after, the Times reported the woman, Rachel Bernstein, left the network with a payout. The case did not involve sexual harassment. As part of the deal, Bernstein was subject to a confidentiality agreement. So I wish I could get paid for somebody yelling at me at all my jobs. But
right.
Nonetheless, in 2004, it goes on, O'Reilly, who had been at Fox since 96, was sued publicly for sexual harassment by a 33-year-old Andrea Macris, a former producer for The O'Reilly Factor. According to the Times, Macris recorded, she was actually smart enough to record some explicit conversations with O'Reilly. People familiar with the events told the paper that the case, which included a $60 million countersuit that alleged scandalous and scurrilous extortion, was fought out in the media for about 2 weeks before O'Reilly, and get this, agreed to pay Macris about $9 million.
Right.
In 2011, Rebecca Gomez Diamond, who had hosted a show on Fox News Network, was told the show was not renewing her contract. She had, just like Macris, she had recorded lewd conversations with O'Reilly, which her lawyers took to the company. She left with an unknown payout. We fast forward now to 2016. According to the Times, lawyers for Lori Dew, a Fox News anchor from 2000 to 2008, went to the company to outline harassment claims against O'Reilly, as well as CEO Roger Ailes. She received a $1.6 million payout. No, she received a payout of more than $1 million. And in the same year, they paid $1.6 million to Juliette Huddy, a regular guest on The O'Reilly Factor. She alleged that O'Reilly had pursued a sexual relationship with her in 2011. So again, it just goes on and on and on. There's actually more, but I think we get the point. This guy has a history and a pattern and a practice and a process of sexual harassment. And to bring up your point about Ludacris, here he is supposed to be the bastion of morality. What does that say?
Exactly. And it's good that he was. I mean, the best thing that could have happened to Fox News is that he was let go.
Well, here's my question: what took so long? And when I say that, it's not just about the sexual harassment claims. What disappoints me about this whole thing, because I'm glad that he's gone, and that's fine, and I'm glad these women were able to get some type of recognition for what happened to them. But I think we can agree that Bill O'Reilly rose to prominence in the first place for being a racist, and I don't mind saying that plainly. That's how he rose to prominence. So what about, so my question to all these advertisers is, where was your sense of morality, feigned outrage, when he looked at Mark Lamont Hill and told him he looks like a drug dealer? He looks like a cocaine dealer. I got a list of stuff. I've got another list of things that O'Reilly has done over the years that aren't about sexual harassment, but I would imagine should have gotten him fired long ago. Let's see. He faced domestic violence allegations. In 2015, Gawker reported on court documents that showed O'Reilly had been accused of physically abusing his former wife, Maureen McPhilmy. Is that a real name? Her name is McPhilmy. Okay. According to the report, O'Reilly's daughter alleged she claimed that she had seen her father dragging McPhilmy down a staircase by her neck. O'Reilly said the report was 100% false. An appeals court, however, awarded McPhilmy, his ex-wife, primary custody of the estranged couple's 2 children. So that's the first thing. This is a man, again, upset about Ludacris, but drags his wife down the stairs by her neck. He made racist comments about a congresswoman. Can we even talk about what he just said about Maxine Waters? Let me see if I can get, here's a quote. I quote, "I didn't hear a word she said. I was looking at the James Brown wig," end quote. Do we have a picture of James Brown? It's the same wig. I mean, these are things that are just beyond repugnant and beyond offensive. Do you recall, Dave, the offensive segment that they aired on his show about Chinatown with his producer Jesse Waters?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Here's the one thing that all of those people have in common that you just talked about. None of them are white men.
Exactly. He's vilified Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter movement is a frequent target on Fox News, and O'Reilly is no exception. He claimed the group is killing Americans, calling it a destructive movement, and declared that very few white Americans respect it. He's also labeled the movement a hate group, a hate America group, and said Martin Luther King Jr. would not participate in the group's protest. Let me tell you, man, nothing offends me more as an African American than when Caucasians speak of Martin Luther King and try and talk about his sensibilities
Exactly.
and what he would be offended by, especially
Right.
in the Black community if he were alive. And the reason it upsets me so much is because they frame it as if he died of a heart attack or natural causes. The reason we can't ask Martin Luther King Jr. if he's offended by what he sees in the Black community is because he was assassinated.
Exactly.
He was assassinated for being everything that you tell us we need to be in 2016: peaceful, nonviolent. So again, the hypocrisy, it blows my mind. But I really let people have it when they do that. But getting back to Mr. O'Reilly, because again, none of these things, he didn't lose a single advertiser in any of the things that we're talking about. He alleged that President Barack Obama had deep emotional ties to Islam. He used a slur for Mexican immigrants. In 2003, O'Reilly described undocumented immigrants from Mexico as, quote, wetbacks, while discussing security at the U.S. Mexico border. Who calls Mexicans wetbacks? Except racists.
Again, we're talking about someone who is culturally, socially on the fringe, and now, you know, it'll be interesting to see how Fox News or what they replace his voice with. I've read recent reports that they're going to be replacing him with Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson is Bill O'Reilly on steroids, 15 years younger. So it'll be interesting to see if there is a real cultural change because of Rupert Murdoch's son and what they're trying to implement now in this new Fox News age.
Yeah, I can tell you about Tucker Carlson. This is my one impression of him that I'll never ever forget. And it was two actually. The first one was that he was on Dancing with the Stars, which was hilarious because he was eliminated the first week because he can't dance at all. But secondly, the first time I saw him from a political point of view was on Fox News as a pundit, and he was talking about Michael Vick, and that's when the whole dogfighting thing had just happened, and Michael Vick had gotten whatever sentence he'd gotten for however many years. And Tucker Carlson said with a very straight face and a very serious tone that he thought Michael Vick should be in jail for life, that
Right.
he should have never seen the light of day. And that told me just about everything I needed to know about Tucker Carlson.
Exactly.
So we can pretty much imagine where his new show is going to go. But back to O'Reilly, because he's not off the hook yet. Here's another one. He claims slaves who built the White House were well fed. Again, not one advertiser was lost. Not
Right.
one write-up, not one reprimand from the station. All of these things were paid out with or were complimented with great ratings.
Right.
He shamed Megyn Kelly for speaking out about harassment that she faced at Fox News. He told her, and this is one I actually want to break this one down a little bit. He said, quote, "If somebody is paying you a wage, you owe that person or company allegiance. You don't like what's happening in the workplace? Go to human resources or leave," end quote.
Exactly.
That's the equivalent of telling Black people, you don't like it here, move. Right?
Exactly.
You don't have who told you got a right to protest and try and get things to be better? You don't like it, get out. And that's essentially what he told her. He repeatedly compared gay marriage to marrying animals.
So it certainly plays into what I said earlier about Bill O'Reilly's favorite topic, the attack of the white male power structure, and anything that requires men to be held accountable, he was against. So it's not surprising, but we do at least have the be confident in knowing that at least we can affect even a Bill O'Reilly economically if we combine our voices and see if we'll get the effect like we just got.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about. I, first of all, would applaud the efforts of all of these women that came forward, that did what they had to do, said what they had to say to get us to this point. Certainly would applaud the attorney Lisa Bloom, who was a big catalyst in trying to get this resolved, trying to get this fixed. And she literally stated she wanted to take him down. So again, I'm glad to see that after all these years, he's finally done it, at least at Fox News. I'm sure that he'll show up in some other medium, but hopefully he'll be weakened, and hopefully his message will not resonate, because I don't see how it can, because if nothing else now, he's been made out to be a hypocrite. He was able to speak from a certain platitude, from a certain point, of being able to have this hierarchy, this moral hierarchy. He doesn't have it anymore. So I don't see how a lot of his message continues to resonate.
Well, we hopefully the same thing that got him caught eventually will go all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's really where it needs to go, because Donald Trump literally thinks he is beyond the law. And I think he's almost said as much. I'm the president now. You can't say that about me. You can't do that about me. That rule doesn't apply to me. So again, if he was on The Apprentice, walking around grabbing women by the genitalia, I cannot fathom what he would do and his expectation of women as president of the United States.
All right, my friend. Well, I am on the plane and we are about to take off, so I will see the rest of the show and I will speak to you soon.
All right, man. Thank you so much for being on with me, Dave. We will see you next week. We'll get things back to normal. Have a safe trip, my friend.
Thank you very much.
All right. So yeah, just a few parting thoughts on this. Again, I do not agree with, support any sexual harassment, any harassment in the workplace. People deal with a lot. Women deal with a lot. And all we want is mutual respect. All we want is equality. Everybody getting paid for the same work that they do the same way. That's a form of harassment and intimidation. When you're not getting paid the same as everyone else for doing the same work. Women getting paid 77 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man earns. So again, much support to all the women that spoke up against Bill O'Reilly. I am glad to see him gone, and I hope that there is something done about the culture of that, not only at Fox News, but in this country we call America. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be on with Dr. Tiffany Sanders. Thanks for listening to and watching Humanity in the Headlines. We are back. This is Atiba Buchanan, your host on Humanity in the Headlines. Thank you so much, Facebook Live, for tuning in. Thank you so much, people of IntellectualRadio.com, for listening today and watching on YouTube. We really appreciate your support. So, second half here, we got a lot to talk about. There was a shooting last Sunday. Mr. Steven Stevens, went out and he shot and killed Mr. Robin Godwin Sr., 74 years old. He shot him. He did not know him, and he even recorded the atrocity on Facebook Live for the world to see. The shooting went viral. It took several hours for Facebook to finally get the video down. But it was just a horrific situation. No one should have to die like that. And definitely on Humanity on the Headlines, we'll talk about that. Robin Godwin Sr. was a father of 9. He was beloved. He had many children, grandchildren, and he was minding his business. Stephen Stevens took his life, and for that he deserved to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Unfortunately, that won't get a chance to happen because he killed himself. But today we want to talk about the angle that we want to talk about this from is from a mental health standpoint, because it appears that this gentleman had a psychotic break. And in the African American community, we don't really talk about mental health and address it in the way that maybe we should. Our tendency in the African American community is to pray it out. You hear the phrase a lot, we're going to pray that demon out. I bind the spirit of depression in the name of Jesus. I bind the spirit of suicide. I'm a Christian, and I've said those words, and I've meant those words, and I've leaned on Jesus for strength in those moments. However, there does come a time when you need to seek more. The Bible says very specifically that faith without works is dead. And I'm going to go personal for a moment and give you an example of what I'm talking about. Long time ago, 2001-ish, around then, my daughter, who just turned 19, was 3 years old. She had just turned 3 in April. This was June 1st, because it was my mother's birthday, and I'll never forget it. She was potty trained. She was on the pot. I was in the basement at my mom's house, and I hear a thud from the bathroom. I run upstairs to see if my daughter's okay, and she was having a seizure. And it was the typical what you think of when you hear seizure. It was a grand mal. That's the technical phrase for it. But she was having a seizure. It was the first time that she'd ever had anything like that at all. Her first 3 years of life were completely and utterly healthy. She was a very bright kid. She still is. No problems at all. So this was a huge, huge shock. To make a long story short, she continued to have seizures for about 1.5 years. She had every type of seizure there was. I didn't even know that there was more than one, but there is. She had a type of seizure that would make her fall on the ground out of the blue. If you've ever seen the movie Toy Story, when the toys are standing around talking, and then when they see a human coming into the room, they all plop to the ground. That's the best description of what would happen to her. She had fallen out of my very hands to the ground many times. She had suffered all types of cuts, swelling, bruises, black eyes, you name it. It was the hardest thing that I've ever gone through. And I've dealt with my own bouts of sickness, but this was far and away the most difficult thing we had ever gone through. We prayed about it. There was a time that I was angry, even at God, about it. We took her to church. We went to church. All of that. But at the same time, we took her to see the neurologist. And at the same time, she was on medication after medication after medication until we found a medication that finally worked. About 1.5 years, pure hell. Couldn't figure out why we were going through this. But we prayed, and we also worked with our doctors. And I thank God for her doctors. And I still do. She's completely healed. And I think it's a combination of prayer and practical. She hasn't even been on Caesar medication in over 12, 13 years. She's 19 years old now. She's graduated high school. She was bilingual, certified bilingual, very bright child. So on one hand, I give God the glory. On the other hand, I thank God for the doctors that he gave us. And we have to be able to do that with mental health as well. He's given us these doctors for a reason. And in a moment, we're going to have Dr. Tiffany Sanders on to further break this down and explain to us the importance of good mental health in our community. You're listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We will be right back. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. This is your host, Atiba Buchanan, and we are discussing the Cleveland shooter, Mr. Steve Stevens, and mental health, the importance of mental health in the Black community. Joining us for this very important conversation, again, is esteemed psychologist, Dr. Tiffany Sanders. How are you today, Dr. Sanders?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I am excellent. It's been a while. I forget what the topic was, but the last time we had you on the show, We Hear You, where we find the humanity in the headlines. And that was back, and I want to say in 2014 or 15. So it's been a while since you've been on with us, but I'm so glad that you joined us today.
Absolutely. I think it was 2015.
Yeah, it was. So
of course, anytime you always have great shows, so I want to definitely help out.
Excellent. I appreciate it. So what I was just explaining before you came on was just the tendency in the Black community to pray everything out. And I say that as a Christian, right? That is people will say, I bind that demon of depression in the name of Jesus. And I'm not making light of anyone's belief, because I believe in that too. But at the same time, there does come a point where you have to make use of the resources that God has given you, your earthly resources that God has given you access to, in the form of the people that are trained to help you through these situations. So can you talk about that intersectionality where faith and exercise meet, where you have to go ahead and just actually do something?
And I'm a Christian too, and I, attend Rock of Ages Baptist churches, and love the Lord with all my heart and pray and read the Bible and all. But, I tend to tell people, God created, doctors for a reason. He created, medicine for a reason. Like, that's when we say it's modern medicine or it's created by man, but God has given us the ability to create these things and to do the research to figure out effective strategies in addition to praying. So I tell clients, you can have prayer and you can also have, counseling and medicine. And sometimes people think it's like all or nothing. You only do one. I'm only going to pray it out. That's my faith, because if I don't pray it out, that means that I don't trust the Lord with all my heart. No, that you're trusting in God. And he's put the resources, he's made these resources available for us to exercise them and use them. So use them in conjunction with other modalities to help address what you might be facing.
Absolutely. I had given kind of a personal testimony. I explained that, I have a 19-year-old daughter who, when she was 3, suffered from seizures very, very badly. And we certainly prayed, and I even found scripture that was just completely appropriate to our situation. But at the same time, we certainly took her to her neurologist to get the medicine that she needed. And ultimately it took 1.5 years, but she's been seizure free now for 15, 16 years. So it's been, so as I was stating myself, on one hand I give glory to God. On the other hand, I still thank God for giving us the doctors that he gave us to help her get through that situation. And I think we have to have that type of mindset when dealing with mental health issues as well.
Right. My dad always says this, and it's not scriptural, but he says, God gave you 5 senses, so use them. Like he gave you common sense. He's given us all these abilities, so we shouldn't just say, okay, well, I'm only going to use, prayer and looking for scripture, because I have looked and sought out scripture that can easily apply to a situation I have, and it's not, and it may not have been within God's will. So I try to encourage myself and others to again exercise using multiple modalities, because if we think about it, God has created everything. God created cars. You can use your foot to walk to work, but you use also a car to get there.
Absolutely.
So why are we gonna pick and choose which blessing that he's allowed us to have, because we think, oh, well, I must not have faith because the Lord says, trust in him with all your heart and lean not onto your own understanding. And I think that's just not the way that the good Lord operates. And in the African American community, we tend not to discuss our mental health challenges. We tend not to seek out diagnoses. We tend to, just, go to church or go to Big Mama, go to the pastor, anoint our head with oil. Yes, do those things, but we tend to forget that there are resources available. So I really have appreciated the African American community reaching out to us and contacting us to assist them when they're having these difficulties.
Well, let's do this. Let's try and unpack some of the common misconceptions about mental health. I had pulled up a few, and you let me know what you think. But first of all, one popular misconception is you're either mentally ill or you're mentally healthy. Like you mentioned, it's like a zero-sum argument. You're either you're either 100% mentally healthy or you're crazy, and there's nothing in between. So kind of speak to that.
Yeah, and mental health challenges is on a continuum. So if we think about it, when you're young and carefree, sometimes you're not having as many difficulties, but then life starts to occur, and then you're recognizing, hey, I'm having some challenges. And then, if we're not dealing with those challenges and coping with those challenges in a very healthy way, then we can go along the continuum, and it can worsen for us. So mental health is really on a continuum. It can be from very light, everyday stressors that we have, to mild depression that everyone goes through at some point or another, to clinical depression. And so we have to realize that it's okay when, based on your life circumstances, to be dealing with some sort of mental health challenge. It's okay to have stressors that sometimes, get the best of us, where we have to pull in resources outside of ourselves and our loved ones. And with the way mental health challenges can be, some of them don't require, traditional counseling or traditional medicine to help you ameliorate those symptoms, but sometimes they do. And again, not being afraid to exercise the resources that are at your disposal to help you deal with those challenges.
Wow. I hope our listeners are taking advantage of this excellent information. I thank you for the eloquence of what you just said. Let me ask you this as well then, because I think a common misconception is that people perceive mental illness as a weakness. And if you could kind of unpack that a little bit for our listeners.
Yeah, people say, oh, you're weak. You're weak because you're a drug addict. You're weak because you have this addiction. You're weak because you can't, cope with it and sort. And men often say, oh, women are emotional. They just can't deal. They just can't deal with it. And sometimes we just degrade individuals who have difficulties, and versus saying, okay, all right, you're dealing with this difficulty. That doesn't mean you're weak. You know, it doesn't mean that you want to have this addiction. Sometimes people's bodies are genetically wired to have depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, addictions. It's not that you're weak, because if it really was about being weak, nobody would choose to have these problems. I haven't yet met someone who really actually truly embraces to have these difficulties. So what happens is that individuals' toolbox isn't vast enough to help them figure out strategies to manage what they're facing. So if in my toolbox are just one or two strategies, I'm just going to church or I read the Bible, that's not enough to let you deal with what you're dealing with. If your toolbox consists of healthy eating, exercise, writing, journaling, talking with a counselor, so then your toolbox becomes more vast, which helps you be stronger to manage it. But that doesn't mean that you're weak because your toolbox is smaller. It just means that you're not aware of what's in front of you that can help you manage it. But nobody wants to have mental illness. And for those who are really struggling, it's not because they're weak, they're feeble-minded or simple-minded. It's just because life has gotten the best of them and their toolbox isn't big enough to manage it.
Wow. So knowledge is power, is basically what you're saying.
Oh, goodness. Knowledge is power. Having good health insurance is power. You know, living in communities where you got access to mental health counselors, that's power. You know, like, it really is a multifaceted array of things that could affect your ability to deal with mental health challenges, right? If you're in inner city communities and there's a paucity of resources, how are you going to address your mental health challenges, right? And if you are in rural communities and there's a paucity of resources, how are you going to address it? So you need to not just have knowledge. You need knowledge. You need money for the copays, especially if you got PPOs. You know,
yes.
You need Andy's deductibles, which have gone up. You need money for the medication. You need to have internet access. It's going to get you to look up the best counselors, right? Because you just don't want to pull them out of a phone book. It takes more than just knowledge. It takes the resources.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that definitely was going to be one of my questions, was to talk about kind of the socioeconomic challenges that people have to getting help in that arena. Let me ask you this, though. Let's talk about then the number, because I think one of the things that holds up a lot of African Americans from getting help sometimes is that they don't trust the system. And, you know, can you blame them in some degrees? But let's talk about the lack of, or perceived lack, at least, maybe you let me know, of African Americans that are actually in the business to help, so that people of color can speak to someone that looks like them, that they feel can identify with what they are going through.
Well, there aren't a lot of African American counselors in the Chicagoland area. We're lucky because the good majority of African Americans reside in these areas, and there are multiple universities and professional schools of psychology that are producing counselors. So you definitely have that. But there are, I think, only at one point I've heard 1% to 2% of psychologists are African Americans. So in the Chicagoland area, you're going to see a larger number. Maybe you'll see up to 10%. But if you go into other communities and go further rural or downstate or suburban, you might only have access to one psychologist. And what if that person isn't a good fit for you and you don't want to see that person? So, living in communities where the numbers are in your favor helps you in terms of having access to those resources. So, and I really say you don't have to see someone who's African American. Some people insist upon seeing someone who's African American. A good counselor can counsel anyone.
Well, that was my next question, was, does it even matter?
No, honestly, I'm glad it doesn't matter, because I just had a couple the other day walk in the office, this white couple, been married 24 years, they were referred by another client of mine who happens to be white. I want you to know that I can see and talk to you, and it doesn't matter what your race or ethnicity may be.
Exactly.
And so I've seen white, I've seen Asian, I've seen Indian, I've seen Hispanic, I see African Americans. Now, am I more likely to see African Americans? Sometimes, because sometimes they're going to intentionally seek you out. But if you can't find someone who's African American, just find someone who has your same belief settings, or someone who is available at your time and area, your insurance, and you have the money to afford it. A good counselor will want to help you.
Right. So in other words, don't let it be a deterrent, and it's better to get the help from somebody than not at all.
Absolutely. Get the help of someone. Do not even look at it about age or, whatever. If they cover your issue and they're an expert in that area, you can educate them along the way, about the intricacies of working with someone who may be African American. But truth be told, I've never met a counselor yet that will turn down a person of color as a client. If so, they're in the wrong field.
Excellent. That's wonderful to hear. So don't let that deter you, good people. Get out there and get some help. So let's talk about this shooting in Cleveland for a little bit more specifically. And I had a couple of aspects of it I wanted to ask you about. What they said was, what was being reported, I should say, is that Stephen Stevens walked up to this man, asked him how old he was, and then he uttered something about his ex-girlfriend, and then shot and killed the man. And I've had people say that they don't think he was crazy; they think he was just mad. But I'm not calling it, and I know we shouldn't really use the word crazy because that's not where I'm going with it. My point is, he was a behavioral therapist himself, and he was a regular guy. Aren't all of us, couldn't all of us be that one or two situations away from snapping?
No, most of us aren't one or two situations away from snapping, and please don't allow people to assume that that's accurate.
Sure.
Because it's not. Most individuals with mental health challenges are not homicidal or suicidal. I mean, it's a very, very, very small percentage of individuals with dealing with mental health issues that are homicidal or suicidal. In this case, I use the word he was evil. I don't have a problem with it. You may say, well, that was mental illness. Mental illness doesn't equate to homicidal.
Sure.
And he was intentional. And he, you heard he asked him his age. I, at one point, heard that he asked him to say the woman's name. Either way, he targeted the man he saw randomly on the street. This man was defenseless, and he shot him point blank, cold blood, and he had nothing to do with this. He took a pillar out of the community and stole someone's life. That this man, if you work with mental health issues and children on a regular basis, we need more people like that person. And this gentleman, I think it was Mr. Godwin, was a pillar and volunteer and generally a good man. So why in God's name are we stealing that life when we need people like him? That was pure evil. It wasn't that he was one or two situations from being, and nobody listened to him and he's a counselor. Counselors should go see counselors. I have been on the couch of a counselor myself, so sometimes I can't counsel myself. So this gentleman was just absolutely evil in his targeting of that man. And I feel so sorry for that family, and definitely praying for them.
Definitely. I'd seen some of the responses from the family, and there was like a wide range. One of the children said that she wished he had gone down in a hail of 100 bullets. She was kind of upset that he had committed suicide. And then we'd also seen children say that they had completely forgiven him. Can you speak to the range of emotions or range of responses in that?
It's called stages of grief. And the first stage of grief is denial. Can't believe that person did it. Anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance is usually considered the last stage. And people fluctuate in and out of the stages. Usually once you get to acceptance, it's not very difficult, but you're less likely to go back into the denial and anger stage. So the daughter of Mr. Godwin, she likely is in the anger stage. She's probably gotten past the denial very quickly and is in the anger stage. Those who are saying they forgive him are probably in the acceptance stage, like they forgive him. But I mean, it's easy to forgive someone when it wasn't your family member. I probably be, stuck up in the anger stage. I'd probably be upset because I wasn't able to take them out. Like when there's somebody like a helpless senior citizen or a young person or a child, those are senseless sort of murders. So I can see the daughter having that visceral, angry response.
Sure.
That's your loved one. But that range of emotions is usually just related to the stages of grief and maybe where you might be.
Dr. Sanders, we thank you so much for being on today and helping us understand this situation better. Good people, if you could tell our listeners how they can follow you, where they can find you if they need help.
Yeah, thank you always for having me, and I love following all your good work and then all the fun things that you're doing. Of course, representing Proviso West quite well.
Thank you.
Yes, follow fellow P-Dub. So your listeners can find me in Westchester. We also have offices in downtown Chicago and in Naperville. And to call our office at 708-223-8405. That's 708-223-8405 to schedule an appointment. We take all insurance and major credit card, and we have 10 counselors who can assist you with almost any aspect of what you may be dealing. So please give us a call. We love to help.
Thank you so much for being on today, and much, much continued success to you. I'm enjoying watching you as well.
Thank you. I got to get you on when I'm filling in myself. So
yes.
Next time I am, I'm gonna holler at you.
Yes, when you need
come on the show.
If you need somebody to beat up on Trump, you call me and David. We're ready.
I'm gonna pull you in the studio. I'm gonna put you on my speed dial. I got you next go round.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanders.
You're welcome, Atiba. Have a great day.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
So that's it, good people of Humanity in the Headlines. We thank you so much for being with us today, helping us navigate through these wonderful conversations and some of our technical difficulties, but we did it. We got through it. Next week, we'll be back, full staffed, ready to go. We want to thank Breon Jones for putting together a wonderful show. I want to thank Mr. Earl Winfrey for providing us this wonderful platform. And of course, you, the listener and viewer, for participating today. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll see you next week on Humanity in the Headlines.